Hi, my name is Aurora, and I'm here to talk to you today about the importance of crafting and controlling your narrative and how you can leverage your lived experience to maximize professional outcomes. Let's get started. Today's discussion will cover three main topics: cultural identity and professional persona, crafting your narrative, and then lastly, embracing what you've learned. Within cultural identity and professional persona, I'll define lived experience and I'll share my personal story. We'll also talk about executive presence and why it's still important. Then we'll move on to crafting your narrative. I'll give you some questions to consider to really get to the bottom of what makes you you and what have been your motivating factors professionally and personally, which leads us to interviewing. There are 4 interviewee archetypes. Where do you fit in and how to overcome any of those challenges? And then lastly, how can you leverage what you've learned to proudly share your story on LinkedIn? If you're not leveraging LinkedIn, you're really missing out. It's important that as you are crafting your narrative, you think about the possible privilege that you have. I know that this term can be off-putting for folks, and trust me when I tell you it's not meant to make anybody feel bad. I just want to define what it is and give some examples of things that we have that we didn't necessarily earn, and how can we leverage the privilege that we have for the benefit of others. And so privileges are unearned. They are granted to people in the dominant groups, whether they want those privileges or not, and regardless of the stated intent. It's well documented that being a man has privileges over being a woman. It's well documented that being white in America has privileges over not being white. But some other privileges I want you to think about is just us being here, us being Comcast employees. That's privilege. That's privilege to have a regular paycheck. It's privilege to have health benefits. But other things like networking after work or going to happy hour to celebrate a teammate's birthday. Not everyone can do that. Some folks are a primary caregiver. And so what can we do to create those opportunities? Maybe a virtual lunch instead of an after work activity. Being born in the United States, being an American citizen, I didn't do anything to make that happen, but I certainly have a lot of privilege with it. Me speaking without an accent, no one asking me to repeat myself because they don't understand what I'm saying. That's a privilege that I have. Another privilege that I have is that I identify with the gender I was assigned at birth. I don't have to correct people when it comes to my pronoun. I present as I identify, and people accept me in that way. So there's lots of inventory that you can do when it comes to privilege. Again, it's not meant to make anyone feel bad at all, but it provides context of how we show up and how, as we uncover those things, how we can advocate and how we can help others. It does frame up your why, which we'll get into a little bit later, but it is important to take inventory of that as you are crafting your narrative. Let's level set by first defining lived experience. Lived experience refers to personal knowledge about the world gained through direct, firsthand involvement in everyday events rather than through representations constructed by other people. People may make assumptions about your identity and lived experience based on things like outward appearance or your position. There are psychological advantages to speaking your story out loud. You are defined by who you are, your values, your belief, your essence. Own your past experiences, good and bad. I'm going to start with my lived experience and my origin story and how I have navigated that into my professional life. So I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan. The photo here on this slide is of me and my 2 older sisters, Monica and Angie, at the Our Lady Guadalupe Mexican Fiesta. This was the church that I went to, and it was about 1980, I guess, that this photo was taken. I am the daughter of immigrants, and I'm first generation Mexican American, and I'm one of 6 children. I grew up in a house with about 14 people living in it. We had many aunts and uncles, and my grandparents lived with us at some point. But that was a very closed life in that I knew it was not something that most people experienced. And so I was comfortable being in that space. And when I stepped outside my door, it was a different life. I grew up in the north side of Flint, and it was and is a predominantly African-American neighborhood. I took a bus to school with mostly white students, where I went to school with mostly white students. And so I learned how to navigate being the only one. I share that because it has really informed how I have not had that experience of being the centered culture. And I don't share that for any sort of sympathy or pity, but to just provide context that there are things that we're just born into, but it does frame up how we're able to connect with others. I mentioned being Mexican American, and in the past few years, I have really dug deep into cultural scripts that show up in my upbringing. And I encourage you to do the same, whether they be actual like ethnic culture or if it's socioeconomic status. It's important to know how your upbringing framed how you navigate your world. And so there are a couple of things that I've discovered that have suited me, and I'm proud to leverage that in my professional career when it comes to Latino cultural scripts. And those two terms, or those two concepts, are collectivism and personalism. And so collectivism is grounded in placing the needs and goals of others before your own. And so when I work and I do service work or ERG work or just anything, I try to consider the larger group and how this may impact others. In personalism, that's taking an active interest in the personal details of lives of others. I love that. I love connecting with people and connecting other people to each other. And I get that from really remembering those details of, oh, where are they from? Or where do they go to school? Or do they have a pet? All of those things I thrive in. The cultural script that has not served me well professionally is a term called paternalism or paternalismo. And what that is the idea that your employer, or Comcast in this situation, is like my father and will take care of me. That if I work hard, then I will be rewarded. And it can really create a situation where you just keep your head down, you work, and things will happen for you. And I did that for most of my career, and it did not suit me. And it doesn't mean that I stopped working hard. It just meant that I literally picked my head up and I started to realize that I had more control in what could be next for me, but I had to be able to talk about what I was doing and take credit for it. So that's a little bit about how I came up and how it formed how I work and how I interact with people. I encourage you to do the same. Just do simple Google search on different types of cultural scripts, or just some reflection on how maybe those traits are serving you and what isn't serving you, and make some adjustments. Many of you have heard the term executive presence. Its meaning has evolved over the years, and I wanted to bring it back so that we can reimagine how it's defined. In its simplest terms, executive presence is about your ability to inspire confidence. Inspiring confidence with your direct reports, that you're the leader they want to follow. Inspiring confidence among peers, that you're capable and reliable. And most importantly, inspiring confidence among senior leaders that you have the potential for great achievements. Scan the QR code for the full Forbes article to read more. Effective storytelling allows leaders to influence, teach, and inspire. It forges connections with people and their ideas. According to executive coach Virginia Ginny Clark, the biggest mistake people make in planning and driving their career is that they are unable to tell their own story. They don't have a narrative. Your story must be clear, coherent, and consistent. Only you can tell your story. It's one of the few variables that is entirely in your control. The most common error people make when interviewing is that they talk too much or they don't talk enough about the things that matter. We are in the home stretch and just 3 slides of content to go. I wanted to share with you 4 interviewee archetypes. You may not fit exactly into any of these categories, but it's definitely something to consider. The first one is the wallflower, which, spoiler alert, that's me. That's someone who's self-effacing, never wants to take credit, is modest, downplays their role and achievement. This is common among women in some cultures. Boasting is distasteful. A way to overcome this is to own your role in the outcomes. Speaking truth is not bragging, and stand up for your accomplishments and for yourself. The second interviewee archetype is utility player. This person has done many things, often well, but it's hard to point to the core competencies that make them successful. They can sound unfocused despite having significant success. If this is something that you can relate to, make sure to be clear on why you took those roles. Express what you learned from everyone. Find the through line that shows what you're seeking now and articulate your core competencies that transcend function and role. The third interviewee archetype is the monolith. This person has stayed in their lane, likely in one function, but can be seen as one-dimensional. Be able to explain the domain expertise and organizational awareness you've gained by staying in one function. Use competencies to paint a better picture of what you've learned and how that can be applied to a different function. And lastly is the bragger. I think we all know one of these people. Won't hesitate to tell you all they've done, but they usually leave out the how and with whom. They believe that their accomplishments and actions speak for themselves. This person may have low EQ and be a little tone deaf. If you feel like this could be your interviewee archetype, show some humility in what you've done and how you've done it with others. How you felt when things went well and when things didn't go well. So which one are you? Earlier in our session, I talked about how we would get to the why a little later. This is the slide that gets to it. This is what will prepare you for any interview because it really gets to the core of what motivates you. There are 3 categories. It's a lot of information, but really getting to who are you? What makes you you? Also, what, where, and when context of what you have done and why. Why did you do these things and why do you want to do what you do now? If you can answer these questions, you'll be pretty ready for that interview. It'll help explain everything that isn't on your resume and why what is on your resume makes sense. Thanks for sticking with me so that we can bring this all together to tie it up with a bow, to share your story loud and proud. I know not everyone is a fan of social media, and that's okay. But I promise you that if you leverage LinkedIn correctly, you can really reach a broad professional audience and give voice to others who may have shared interests. It took me time to understand how this platform worked, so I'm going to give you some pro tips to maximize your audience. First, let's talk about hashtags. I'm a former active duty spouse, and the military community will always hold my heart. As you can see, #military has more than 377,000 followers. When I celebrate or post military relevant items, by me using this hashtag, it will push out to the feed of those 377,000 followers, and I don't even need to be connected to them. Another hashtag I use is #network, which has more than 56,000 followers. We could use more followers of I work for Comcast, so take this one as your homework. The middle of the slide shows a repost of our very own Mountain West sales engineer, Kyle. Kyle is in the Utah National Guard, and his MOS is 89 Delta. Translation, military occupational specialty, and 89 Delta is explosive ordnance disposal, aka bomb squad. Kyle posted a video giving praise to our above and beyond military benefits we offer to members of the Guard and Reserves. Here's an example of how you can celebrate others and things you care about if you're not quite ready to jump right in with sharing specific things about you. And on the right is a post from a few weeks ago. This one's very personal. In early March, I, along with many of my HR friends and family, were impacted. I was processing what that meant and how I felt and shared what had happened because I knew that I hadn't done anything wrong. I wanted to share with the folks that I have worked with over the past 12 years that I was okay and I was hopeful for what better could be on the other side of this. This post by far has received the most traffic. I don't say that to be boastful about how people feel about me, but more to illustrate how it may have resonated with what their teams were experiencing or what they have gone through or are going through. I sincerely hope that you will continue to dig into your motivations, fine-tune your story, and approach your career deliberately in ways that fulfill your passions. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please scan the QR code and let's close that gap.